Hey everybody, welcome back to the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. It is the practice report. It is brought to you by Byers Auto, and that's Spencer Holbrook, Tim May, Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward, the Buckeyes practice numero 4, Quattro.
Yeah, that was weird.
It's a mix. It's a hybrid. It's in honor of USA-Mexico on Thursday night. Anyway, the defensive lineman came out to chat with the media afterwards. Pretty informative session. We're going to break it down right now. What was your number one takeaway from these Buckeyes that talked about the Rushmen today, Berm?
To me, it's the difference between the upperclassmen and the lowerclassmen as far as how much more eager they are to talk to the media. Because the younger guys are so excited to be out here and talking, and Michael Hall and Tyleik Williams, Jack Sawyer talked for like 25 minutes. Like, these kids like engaging, and the older guys are like, I'm so tired of seeing these people. But I think the one thing that my takeaway really is that these guys are still trying to figure out exactly how the Jim Knowles defense impacts the defensive line. And I don't know that it will that much, but certainly to talk about the Leo or the Jack or whatever we want, like, everyone's asking about that. But these kids are towing the company line saying, we don't know what this is. And I think that's the answer you're going to get through most of the spring.
But I think at the same time, I don't think they're completely lying when they say they haven't really got into it yet. Because from everything we've heard, it says that it's been pretty basic with what they're doing so far. And so, yeah, there's an aspect of like, they don't really know right now, but also like, I'm sure that not everything's been installed. We have probably more questions than they have answers right now about the Leo. And that's probably the main takeaway is like, that's getting very much like hyped up because it's a new thing, it's exciting, but at the same time, like, business is still business in the defensive line room, and you've got a lot of talent there, you've got a lot of guys who can do it, and now you just have to see which are the best four, who are the best four, what's the combo of the best four, and if there's a guy that's going to be standing up, maybe it is one of these defensive ends. If not, it's probably going to be one of those linebackers. And so a lot of questions in this room, but also, like I said, business is still business there.
I don't think they're lying, but I'm not convinced that they're entirely telling the truth, because
they're not.
People being groomed and 4 players roughly that you know are in the mix to play that Leo already. Whether it's installed or whether they've used it through 4 days, you know, that may be a real thing. But when you're sending Mitchell Melton down to work with that unit, when you're talking about Cade Stover and the way that his athleticism and his mentality fits, when you have Jack Sawyer and when you have Zach Harrison with their lateral agility, mobility, freakiness, when their athleticism, all that. I mean, you know that those 4 people are in the mix for that. So they could provide more insight than maybe they want to, but that's the part where you're both right. You're towing the company line at this point because you've only practiced for 4 days, and I don't think that Jim Knowles or Larry Johnson wanted to get in a situation at this early point where we say, well, that guy's definitely going to play this hybrid role that we're going to be talking about a lot going up to September in Notre Dame.
That was like when we were asking Jack Sawyer about it. It was more of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge kind of situation. What are you talking about? Blah, blah, blah. Clearly, they've got some things in mind. Clearly, he has embraced the Jim Knowles approach. I mean, there's a refreshing flow going through this defense, in my opinion, is starting with this defensive front. But my takeaway was talking with Tyleik Williams. I'll write a little story about him later, but he's a different guy than he was 8-10 months ago. Mm-hmm. That bodes well. Michael Hall, I mean, he said both of those guys exude a lot of confidence. And like we've talked about a million times, the real cornerstone for any kind of defense, and especially when you look at, like we talked about the other day, Georgia, Alabama, the Los Angeles Rams, whatever, man, if you get some guys in there, 3 technique and nose who can hold sway, you've got something going on. And I think Tyleik, both of those 2 guys exuded a lot of confidence about what's coming. And I think that bodes well for this defense.
One other thing that I sort of take away from today is there's a lot of guys in this group that feel like there's some unfinished business. I mean, these are Zach Harrison, could have gone to the NFL. Whether or not where he would have been drafted, you can debate that all you want. He would have been drafted last year. Teron Vincent, all the injuries he had. Jaron Cage coming back for his 6th year and everything he's had to go through. These guys, Tyler Friday, who hasn't played in 2 years. I mean, there's a lot of guys here that I think feel like they have something to prove, and I think that's the interesting mix between the veterans and the younger guys, because the younger guys are just waiting in the wings going, okay, we're ready to go. We want to just attack. And these older guys are a little bit more reserved and conservative in what they're saying, but the underlying message from them all is, I'm not done here, and there's something that this entire group has to prove.
And there's justifiably a lot of attention on the higher end guys, proven starters, somebody like Zach Harrison coming back. Teron Vincent off that Rose Bowl, the younger guys with Tuimoloau and Sawyer. But I think I spent a lot of time talking to Noah Potter and Tyler Friday because of their injuries and what that might mean for the overall depth of this unit. And a healthy Tyler Friday can really be an impactful player. I'm not suggesting, double-digit sacks, but someone who has a second or third option could give you 5 or 6 of them and a lot of good snaps and can stop against the run. I asked specifically about him trying to play that 3 technique. I said, I've been beating this drum for a while, and he's like, yeah, I know, but it's not going to happen. It's like, okay, well then you're going to put him maybe at a post defensive end and stop the run and occasionally rush the passer. That'll work. And Noah Potter at this time last year, we were spending a lot of time looking at how much he bulked up. I think it was up to almost 275 pounds, somewhere in that ballpark, so that he could play 3 technique. And that was a position that we thought there was some uncertainty at and may still be as Ohio State fits the pieces together. But first he had a foot injury that required surgery, and then a very scary eye issue where he said he was 30 minutes from blindness if they didn't have surgery, a loose retina that he was dealing with. And that's a scary life situation, obviously. And he's still trying to work back from that to get to 100% full go and see if he can restart some of that momentum that he had at this time a year ago. But if he can, if both of them can, I mean, you're talking about 8, 9, 10 guys that can rotate through and really be dangerous weapons for Jim Knowles.
That's what I asked a couple of the guys about it. Is there a perfect balance in this room between veterans and young guys? And I think, starting to look at the overall build of this defensive line room, there really is. You've got, guys waiting in the wings, like you said, Michael Hall, and even Tyleek Williams, who got his feet wet a little bit. You've got the superstars in Jack and Zach and JT, and then you've got a bunch of guys who are almost in the middle there who just need to prove themselves, but also have a little bit of experience. And so I think there's a really healthy mix of guys who can contribute, guys who will for sure be, those guys, and then also guys who are just waiting for their turn. And so it's, like I said, it's almost like a perfect balance of everything you need. What I'm trying to say is the recipe is there for a really dominant and good defensive line room, and they have to figure out how to put it together because the talent was there last year and they couldn't figure it out quite how to put it together and make it work. And I think they have the tools to do it this year.
Yeah, and we talked about this before, that Jim Knowles is coming in with fresh ideas and fresh look, etc. But he's benefiting greatly by guys who have kind of paid a price, like Noah Potter. I mean, for example, I thought he had a real chance of playing last year until this stuff happened to him. All these guys have had that moment where things didn't go right. Like Jack Sawyer said, they got punched in the mouth, by Michigan and really didn't get back to it. But second half of that Utah game, even the defensive front, Teron Vincent, these guys got after it. They just played with a savagery they hadn't played with for a game and a half, and it totally changed things. And he said they've ridden that wave into the offseason, into the spring, and they feel really good about it. So, like you've even brought up many times, Jim Knowles is really benefiting by a lot of guys not having the year they wanted last year, but clearly have some talent about them. And it's going to be really interesting to see him put all those pieces together.
I think that what's fascinating to me is that last year's defense obviously was bad, but the most talented players on this defensive line were the freshmen. It was Tyleek Williams, Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau. Like, these are the guys that have the athletic upside that is higher than everyone else. And so because of coming off of COVID year before that, because of all the chaos with Matt Barnes and Kerry Combs and who knows what else was going on, a lot of these guys didn't really get a chance to be that guy because they were like, we should just play with the guys we know because we can trust that they're going to do the right things. And this year, I think you're going to see, this is Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau's defensive line. And this is not Zach Harrison's defensive line. This is not Javonte Jean-Baptiste or Tyler Friday's. Those guys have to figure it out. I mean, Zach Harrison's the leader of the group without question, but as far as who's going to be the guy that I think you're going to see run out there on the first series of the season, I think you're going to see all 3 of those guys out there at the same time. And it's sort of a changing of the guard. But as you said, like, it does matter now for Teron Vincent. Like, these guys that have an opportunity to reemerge and be the guys that everyone thought they would be.
I think it's worth looking at that as well when we're evaluating the success or lack of success of that unit. When I'm talking about Tyler Friday and that season-ending knee injury, when Noah Potter with 2 health setbacks and not playing all season, the injuries that Haskell Garrett dealt with throughout the entire second half of the season, Teron Vincent needing some time to get back into the lineup regularly and then finally explode the way he did in the Rose Bowl. That was a unit that was never at full strength and never really even close to it. And the part that you're talking about, Tim, some of the guys that were out there, Zach Harrison didn't reach his potential. He's been open about that. Well, he came back with something to prove, but a lot of guys are responding to injuries and the opportunities that have been taken away from them and getting back.
Agree.
There's a lot. So, some of the situation is not lack of performance. It's just you have a championship hunger, you have being back on the field hunger, you have NFL stock that you're worried. Like all these, this group has so much to prove, and I think that would apply to Larry Johnson as well, because the last 2 years have not necessarily been the standard that he expects and upholds and has traditionally produced. So when you combine all of that talent now with a little bit of health, and it's just 4 days, you knock on wood that Ohio State gets to keep that, and then good coaching, boy, that's that recipe Spencer's talking about can be pretty dangerous.
Yeah, they have to have guys. I mean, like Ty Hamilton. I mean, right on down the line, there are guys that have a chance to really bubble up here from a depth standpoint. You get the idea that Coach Knowles, is really excited about the depth. We talked about this yesterday. I mean, he's not going to have to just go with an elite 11 and then maybe these other guys come on. He's got some depth he can play with, which he can also use to kind of scoot along the starters, if you follow my drift, from a whip standpoint. And I just think it's really...
You don't want to use the whip out here.
No, but you know what I'm talking... I mean, I'm talking about...
the carrot.
Yeah. You know what I meant.
I got it.
But the bottom line is that's what's interesting to me about putting those two things together. Because as Jack Sawyer talking about him being this mad scientist, these are guys on the defensive line who understand what's coming. Already know what's here, but they won't tell us. It's more of it.
Yeah.
But that's the interesting part about this little jambalaya we're going to see.
I want you to start with this on that. Let's do a bold prediction.
Okay.
Which defensive lineman leads Ohio State in sacks in 2022? Spencer?
I think it's JT Tuimoloau. I think the upside on him, the way that he could really almost take over the Big Ten, as far as there's Aiden Hutchinson's gone, there's no Bosa, there's no Chase Young, there's a little bit of a gap in who's the most dominant defensive lineman in the Big Ten. Both of those guys, JT and Jack, have a chance to be that. JT's upside is just through the roof. I'm really excited to see what he can do.
Tim, who's your pick?
Tyleik Williams, only because I like his ridiculous quickness, and now he's 40 pounds lighter. I asked him if he went into the weight room and ever picked up 40 pounds and walked around like, hey, this was me a year ago. You know what I mean? That's how you can really tell the difference. But I mean, this guy has got something special, man, and he has a shorter way to go to the sack than some of these other guys. I really like Sawyer and his upside, but I really like Tyleik Williams becoming basically a dominant player inside.
I think that the Leo position is going to create a lot more pass rush opportunities from different angles in the Ohio State defense, and we've seen that a little bit on film with Jim Knowles, but also the plays that come to mind are when Ohio State dipped into that well with Jeff Hafley and moved Chase Young around the formation and let him create havoc in different spots. And I think that Mitchell Melton is going to be the guy that ultimately takes that role and really runs with it. Maybe I'll be wrong about that. But I still think that Jack Sawyer would capitalize and be in that spot enough to rack up enough sacks to lead Ohio State. So I think Melton starts there, but Jack Sawyer is going to be put in spots to really thrive.
This is what I like. We're all picking different people because I'm taking Zach Harrison. He's going to have 10 sacks this year for Ohio State because more than anyone else on this roster, he has the body type and the athleticism to play any one of those spots on the defensive line. Right. He can play the Leo, he can play the rush end, he can play inside, he can stand up and drop back into a linebacker type situation like we saw. I think Zach Harrison will benefit from Jim Knowles' creativity more than any player on this defense.
And if I can sneak one little last thing in, the best thing about this defensive line right now is the fact that Jim Knowles described this defense as a safety-driven defense. We've asked a lot about linebackers. There's not a lot of attention today, obviously we are because we just talked to him, but overall there's not a lot of defensive attention being paid to what the defensive linemen are doing because there are so many questions at linebacker and who's going to play those 9 safety spots that are on the field at a time or whatever. But that means that the defensive line can kind of work in silence and make sure that they leave their mark without having the spotlight on them this spring. And I think that's going to catapult them to just ridiculous things in the field.
Basic football, an A-gap attacking son of a gun changes everything for the other 10 guys. I mean, that's what I'm intrigued to see if that develops like I think it will with this defense because it changes everything.
The way I view it is the last year's defenses last year or the year before were as bad as Ohio State's ever been. In 2020, it was the secondary. 2021, it was the linebackers. But both years were subpar defensive lines, not because they weren't talented, but because of injuries, because of COVID misses, all the things that happen. The defense goes as the defensive line goes. If we think about Ohio State football in the last 10 years, the dominant defenses were the ones that had dominant defensive line and dominant games. When the Buckeyes needed something to happen, it was the defensive line that made something happen. I mean, numerous times from 2014 to 2019. Somebody, that has to be the group. And I don't think that Larry Johnson gets a pass this year. And I mean, certainly he's a legend. Everyone knows that. But that group has to perform.
Well, he's another person I think that I mentioned that is motivated and potentially to go out on a really high note. We'll see what transpires. This is the 4th practice of spring, so there's a long way to go for every unit at Ohio State as spring practice rolls along. That's Spencer Holbrook, Tim May, Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. This has been the Practice Report. It's brought to you by Byers Auto. It'll be the last one for this week. The Buckeyes have a closed workout entirely on Saturday, but we will be back in the Woody next week. So stay tuned for full coverage of the Ohio State Buckeyes at lettermenrow.com.